What is up, my friends? Welcome back. Listen, today's training is going to put a lot of really valuable tools in your toolbox. We're going to talk about pseudo elements, but as always, in the videos that I create, we're talking about so much more. We're going to cover locally scoped variables. We're going to cover some best practices. We're going to cover some stuff that honestly, I haven't seen anybody else doing or talking about. It's a technique that I came up with to solve this kind of unique situation where you have these pseudo accent elements, but you want to be able to use them in different contexts on the site without recreating them over and over and over again, or using a bunch of different classes or anything like that. So this is one of those videos. It doesn't matter if you're a beginner or you're intermediate or you're very advanced. There is something for everybody in this tutorial. And we're going to go nice and slow. Let me take a look at what we're going to be creating first. This is my new site, geary.co. I did a 2-hour deep dive on how every part of this website basically was built last week. And sorry, I'm still, my voice is still affected by being sick for the last couple of weeks, but we're going to work through it. It's going to be okay. I did a 2-hour deep dive on this entire website last week. I'm going to link to it down below. If you have not watched that deep dive, I would highly recommend you take the time and watch it. Everybody that's commented has basically said it's packed with value. The entire 2 hours should be watched. There isn't any fluff in it whatsoever. So definitely take the time, go and watch that. But if you see behind me are these little pseudo accent blob type elements. And then actually, if we go way down the page, you're going to see them again. There's one right there and there's one right here. And this is what I mean, where we want to use the same accent element in different contexts, but we don't want to have to use all these different classes. And it would just be nice if we could apply one class to an element and we get those, accent design, whatever you want to call them. We get these accents, but we're able to manipulate the accents on a one-off basis. For example, can we change their width? Can we change their angle? Can we animate them differently? Because these can also be animated with GSAP if you build them properly. So the tutorial today is going to cover kind of all of this. First of all, how do we create these pseudo accent elements? Secondly, how do we make them dynamic to where we can use one class, but still somehow control them differently depending on where they happen to be located? Because that is a big thing with pseudo accent elements like this. So if you guys are ready, I'm ready. Let's go ahead and dive right in. What I want to show you is that the accent blurs, as they're called here, are created with one single class called accent blur. And you'll notice that there's two of them. We're going to talk about pseudo elements in a minute. But if we scroll all the way down on this page, the exact same class, accent blur, was used on this entire section here to create the same effect. But then obviously I had to change their behavior because they're used in a different context. And that's exactly what we're going to be covering. So what I'm going to do is take off this class of accent blur, and you're going to see that now I'm just left with my image, and the two accent elements behind the image are gone. And now we have to create them from scratch. So what I'm going to do is just create a new class called blur. That's just a brand new class that we're going to use. I'm going to delete this after we're done because this is my live site. But you see nothing has happened when I add the class of blur. So the first thing we need to talk about is how do we just get pseudo accent elements to appear? How do we create them? How do we style them? How does this all work? And I'm going to go nice and slow so any of the beginners can keep up with this. And then we'll quickly, after that, get into a lot of the advanced stuff with the locally scoped variables, a lot of stuff that we're going to be talking about in this tutorial, the whole purpose of this tutorial. All right, so let's talk about accent elements. There is something called a before and something called an after. These are pseudo elements, okay? And in Bricks, you can manage pseudo elements up here at this little arrow, and it says select or create pseudo class. And you can see that there is a before. Actually, I think this before is only here because I've used it on the website before. I think that they may not even be here by default. You actually have to type them in and create them. But here's the thing, in Bricks, and really in most builders, I would say, do not use whatever panel or organization method they have for pseudo elements. I would completely ignore these areas in the builder. You're just gonna want to write CSS for this, okay? You're gonna have to trust me here. You don't want all this stuff spread out all over the place, okay? We're gonna put it all in one spot. It can be in a WP code box style sheet. It can be inside the builder style sheet. Doesn't really matter. You just want it all in one place. And it's a really good idea for you to learn how to create pseudo elements by hand, okay? This is one of those things, if you don't know how to do it, if you're scared of it, just push through it. Just get yourself, you're gonna get a lot of confidence by doing this by hand, all right? So let's go do it by hand. So we're gonna go down to the Style tab, CSS tab, and this is where the magic is gonna happen. Now, normally we want to attach these pseudo elements to the class so that when we apply the class, the pseudo elements appear. Make sense? So normally you would write blur, and then you would write before, something like that. So this is how you create a pseudo element. However, in Bricks, it's a little bit different, sorry. This whole class right here is actually replaced by the word root. Anything that you have selected, it doesn't matter what class it is, you use the word root to reference that item, to reference that class, okay? So we're gonna do root before. It's exactly the same as if I was writing blur before. So if you're in WP code box, you're gonna have to write blur before. All right, but if you're in Bricks, you can just write root, which is the placeholder for the active class. So we're gonna do root before, and we're going to open our curly brackets. Now, here's the first thing you need to know about pseudo elements. And I'm gonna show you what happens in the actual HTML on the page in just a minute. But they will not appear unless you define content for them. All right, now content is often blank, but you still have to define a content instruction, okay? So a content could just be a letter though. So I'm gonna hit save on this, and we're gonna go to the front end, and we're gonna see that there is an A right there. You guys see that? That is the pseudo element. And in fact, if we inspect this, and I'm gonna move my inspector window off to the side over here. All right, can we make that a little smaller? Yes, we can. And will we bring this down a little bit? Yes, we can. Okay. So I'm going to make sure that we have this image selected. It's actually the figure tag. So there's a figure tag up here. Here is the before element. And one thing that's important to note is pseudo elements, even though it appears like it's outside, it gets put inside the element. That's really important to know. The pseudo elements are put inside the parent element. They are not outside of the parent element. Now, there's another pseudo element that we have access to called after. So if I just duplicate that and I change the before to after, and I change this A to a B, and then I hit save, and we go to the front end, we can take a look at this. We do have a B down here. So it makes sense, right? The A is before, and the B is after. They're both inside the figure tag, but one comes after the element and one comes before the element. Now, other thing to notice, it is pushing my element out of position. It is influencing the content around it just like a block level item on the page would do. For the little accent pseudo elements that we're gonna be creating, we're not gonna want that to happen. We actually need these accent elements to behave independently of everything around them. And so we're gonna talk about that as well. But I want you to see that we can just put an A and a B on here just using pseudo elements. You can put any kind of content, right? You can put a lot of different stuff with the content tag, or we can have blank content. Now, just because we have blank content doesn't mean nothing is gonna show up. We can still make things show up. Now, for the ease of use here, I'm gonna remove the after. We're just gonna work on the before right now. So the first thing I need to know is that if I want something to show up, it's probably gonna need a width and a height. It's gonna need some sort of dimensions, because right now, blank content is not, it just doesn't exist. There's nothing there. So I can just pop a width on here. Now, what should my width be? I really don't know. I'm gonna put a height on here as well. And this is the thing. I think a lot of people struggle with writing CSS or even approaching a task like this, because in their mind, they're like, I don't know all the answers ahead of time, so I'm not even gonna try. And I'll let you in on the secret. When we, advanced web designers, developers, we're trying to work our way to a solution. We don't know all of the things ahead of time. I can't tell you what all of the values are going to be right off the top of my head before I even get started. You have to work your way there progressively. You're going to have to try things, move backwards, then move forwards, right? 2 steps forward, 1 step back, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. You're going to run into issues and hurdles, and you got to solve for them. We all do this. So you just have to say, all right, we're going to approach this. I'm going to get started, and I'm going to progressively work my way towards a solution. Perfectly fine. Okay, we all do that. So don't think to yourself, I don't know all the answers ahead of time, so I'm not even gonna try. None of us know all the answers ahead of time. We're all working towards the solution. Okay, so I'm putting a width and a height of 40 rem. Why 40 rem? Don't know, don't care, just threw it out there. Doesn't matter. None of this matters yet. Now, why can't I see anything? If we save, we go to the front end, why can't I see anything? Well, my A's and B's are gone, that's good, but I can't see anything because there's still nothing to see. Imagine a 40 rem by 40 rem box that has no color, no border, no nothing. Obviously, we're not gonna be able to see it. So let's give it a way to see it. Maybe a border of 5 pixels solid red. And then we're gonna save, and we are going to refresh on the page. Now, what is going on here? I have no idea. We see just a little red strip. So it's supposed to be 40 rem by 40 rem, but I'm really not seeing it at all. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to give it a display of flex, and we're going to see if that changes anything. So I'm gonna refresh, and now, oh, look, I'm seeing it. Okay, wow. I am seeing it now, but it's way not where I need it to be. So the first thing, remember I said that if you just display a pseudo element, it's actually going to impact other elements around it, and we don't want it to impact other elements around it. So one thing we can do is make it position absolute, which removes it from the stacking context of the page and basically allows us to put it wherever we want, and it won't have any impact on the position of other elements. So let's go ahead and give that a shot. So I'm going to say position absolute, and I'm going to save. See, I'm just progressively working my way towards where I want to be, where I want to go. So this is what it looks like when it is position absolute. Now, I don't actually want it to be a bordered box. I want it to be a blob, right? I want it to be a solid color. So I'm going to take off that border, but at least that border allowed me to identify what I'm working with, right? It allows me to see something on the page. So this is a perfect example of how you can try something, 2 steps forward, and then take 1 step back. So now I'm taking my 1 step back and I'm switching to a background color. And I can just say red as my background color. Do I use the color red on this website? No, I don't use the color red on this website. So why am I choosing red? Because it doesn't matter. I just need to see something. I just need to see what I'm working with here, okay? So now let's go and refresh, and I see, okay, there it is. I got a red box on the page. Boom, checkbox, right? But now I got to keep going. What is the next thing that I need to figure out? Well, for me, obviously, we have a box that we can make maybe into a blob, but it covers up the image. It's not behind the image. So now we need to talk about our axes, right? You have your x-axis, that goes left to right. You have your y-axis, that goes top to bottom. You also have a z-axis that goes straight through the screen. And now you think in layers, okay? So instead of things being left to right or top to bottom, they're now on top or on bottom of themselves on the z-axis. This is controlled with z-index, okay? And we just give things numbers. So I'm gonna come over here and say the z-index, if it's a positive number, it's gonna be more prioritized on top. If it's a negative number, it's gonna be prioritized on the bottom. And this is kind of like in Photoshop where you right-click a layer and you're like send to back, right? And it just sends it to the back. That's what we're doing here with a z-index of -1. However, this is going to cause yet another problem. The pseudo element has just disappeared. And this will happen from time to time. And sometimes it's unexplainable. But I will give you a master tip, okay? Anytime you're working with negative z-index and it's causing a problem, I don't particularly care what the problem is. In this case, the problem is that the pseudo element completely disappeared. Is that a problem? Yes, it's a problem. So I said, anytime you're using negative z-index and there's a problem, doesn't matter what the problem is, then you're gonna write these words right here. You're going to come down, and actually this needs to happen on your parent element, okay, not on the pseudo element. So we're gonna go to the parent level. So I'm just selecting the root, which if we remember moments ago, what did I say that equals? It's a reference for blur. It's a token for the class that you have active, okay? So it's just like writing blur, okay? So I'm on the parent, wow, be nice if I could type. We're on the parent class, all right? So I'm just saying root, that's my token. And now I'm gonna say isolation, isolate. And then I'm gonna save. And now our square comes back and our negative Z index is working. What does that do? It basically reissues the stacking context for this specific element versus looking at the stacking context of the entire page. All right, so next step, what do we need to do now? Well, it would be nice if we can make it more blob-like, I guess. First, let's just change its color. Now that we've kind of got things going, like they're getting really close to where we want to be, let's actually get a real brand color in there. So I'm going to change from red to a variable called action. And that is my website's action color. Very, very good idea to use variables for everything that you do. You would not, because you don't, do you know, even if you knew what my action color was, answer this question. Would you know the hex code off the top of your head? Would you be able to just, oh, let me just type in my hex code? No, you got to go look it up, and then you got to put it in, and then if it ever needs to change, you got to go find all the places you use the hex code, and you got to change it, and yada, yada, yada. Don't do all of that nonsense, okay? Create variables for your colors. And if you, this is, a different tutorial. If you use automatic CSS, these variables are automatically created for you, so they're already ready to go. That's the case right here. That's what's happening now. So I can easily just say, I want this to be my action color, and bam, it's my action color. So let's take a look at that. Sorry, we got the old cough coming back. All right, so guys, we're getting very close on this. We're getting very close. If I want it to be more blob-like, let's go back and take a look at this. What can I do? How do we get this effect? Well, I'll tell you, it's very easy. It's probably easier than it looks. Number one, we have to rotate the blob a little bit. I don't want it to be a perfect square back there, because a perfect square just starts to look like too perfect-y, okay? So we want to rotate it a little bit. So what we're going to do is come in with a transform of rotate. And rotate is expressed more as a function in CSS, where you're going to use open and close parentheses, but it's very easy to do. It's just based on degrees, and you can say like, I want to rotate it -5 degrees. We'll take a look at that on the front end. So there's my slight rotation, okay? The next thing I want to do is I want to blur it, all right? Now, what a lot of people I think would do is they would say, I need a blurred box and a blurred pseudo element back there, and it needs to be at a certain opacity and a certain amount of blur, and it needs to be a transparent PNG image that we're then gonna have to, turn into a WebP to really optimize the file size, and they go off into Photoshop land. I'm telling you the truth. This is what a lot of people do. They go off into photo, and if you do this, I'm calling you out right now, because you're gonna see how ridiculous this is, how absurd this is. They go off into Photoshop land, and they create a box, and they blur it, and they angle it, and then they make it a certain transparency, and then they make sure there's no background, and they export it as a PNG, and then they upload it, and then they switch it to a WebP, and they do all this other stuff, and then only to have, yes, the effect that they wanted, but zero control over that element ever again, without going through that entire process yet again. And you'll see them do this, because they'll put it on the website, and then they'll be like, ooh, that opacity I chose, it needs to be a little less. Back into Photoshop, change the opacity, export again, bring it in, upload again, swap out the file. Oh my gosh, what an absolute nightmare, okay? Don't do this. So look, I can do all of this without Photoshop. Do it, if you can do it with CSS, do it with CSS. Don't be in Photoshop land. You want to avoid, my goal is to get through every website without opening Photoshop. How about that? Let's just make that the general rule. Get through every website without opening Photoshop. All right, here we go. So we're going to go with another kind of function, right? So we're going to do a filter blur. All right, and then blur just takes a number, and this is typically expressed in like pixels. So a 5 pixel blur gives me this. Now, Does that look good? No, that's not enough blur. We need to blur a lot more. How much do we need to blur? I don't really know. Let's just add a 0. So let's go save, and let's look at it on the front end. I think that's more or less where we need to be. The problem now is that it's just way too bright. It's too in your face. So do we have a solution for that in CSS? Yes. We can just change the object's opacity. So I'm going to come down here and put an opacity instruction of 0.2. And then I'm going to resave. And guys, look how close we are getting now. So there is the original, and there is what we are working on. You see it's still a little bit too bright. So I can bring it down a little bit more. Maybe we'll do 0.12, which is 12% instead of 20%. And then we will refresh. Now, I'm not trying to make it exactly perfect, but guys, that is really, really, really close. It's almost exact. Okay, so now that I've got my before pseudo element created, and we can test this out, guys. I'm gonna take off the blur, it goes away. All right, let's look at this on the front end. And now you can start to see how easy this is to add to an element. You're like, I want this element to have blurred accent elements, and I'm gonna put that on, I'm gonna hit save, and then I'm gonna refresh, and there it is. What we need to do now is create the second object. And this is gonna be using the after pseudo element. So I'm gonna copy everything that I have here, and I'm gonna paste it, and then I'm gonna just change this to after. Now, if I save and refresh, I see that it doesn't really look like I have 2 of them. Where is the other one? Well, we actually forgot a step. Let me actually back up here, okay? Because this will make more sense if we just do this on the before we move into afterland. So whenever you position something absolute, it's a really good idea to give it coordinates, okay? So we can use a top coordinate, we can use a left coordinate. You wanna do one on the y-axis and at least one on the x-axis. That's a good practice, okay? So I have top null, left null. I'm gonna do top of 0 and left of 0, which is gonna put this box in the top left corner, okay? So it'd say go 0 from the top, which means stick it to the top. Go 0 from the left, that means stick it to the left, and it's now in the top left corner. So we can look at this, we'll save, we'll refresh, and basically it hasn't moved. You know why? Because that's the default position. Now, I'm gonna go change the top to bottom and change the left to right, and hit save, and then refresh. And now you see it's down here, okay? So I'm able to really control the position, the exact position anywhere around this image. Now it's gonna stick to the image itself. And to make sure that it's really attaching itself to the image, it would be a good idea to come up here to the root and do position relative. And if you haven't watched my whole video on like all things positioning, definitely go watch that so you understand why we're doing position relative on the parent element and how that influences the position absolute on children. Remember, I said it was very important that we understand that these are child elements. They're not outside of the parent, they're inside the parent. That lets you know how to use positioning properly for these elements, okay? But now I have a bottom and a right. Okay, so now what we're gonna do, now that we have coordinates, and we're gonna switch this back to top and left. All right, now, and then you'll see why this makes more sense. I'm gonna switch this to after, and then I'm just gonna change this to bottom and to right. And then we're gonna hit save, and we are going to refresh. And now you see I have them in both places. So here's one, and here's the other one down here. Now what I can do is I can change the color of the second one, and I'm just gonna use my other variable, secondary. All right, so we're gonna hit save, and now we're gonna refresh, and it's immediately adopting the secondary color. Same opacity, same size, same blur, same angle. Actually, I wanna change the angle. So what I'm gonna do is use the opposite angle. So instead of a -5-degree rotate, I'm doing a +5-degree rotate. Okay, so now we're gonna refresh, and it's hard to see because it's blurred and opacity is lowered and all of that good stuff. But what we can do is we can now move on. We've got our 2 elements to thinking more advanced. Because as you're seeing, I want independent control over these 2 elements. That's number 1. Number two is I want to be able to reuse this class on other elements and have independent control over both items, independent from where they were used previously, but I want to use this one class. I don't want any additional classes. It's kind of like a game, right? Where someone's like, all right, here is your mission. You have to be able to display two pseudo elements. You need independent control over those pseudo elements, but you have to assign them to a single class, and you have to be able to use that class on any other element on the website while still having independent control over the position of those elements without affecting the other uses that you already used throughout the website. How many times can I say the word use? It seems like because we're using a class, the whole point of a class is that we have global control. Like if I change the two elements here, they'll change everywhere the class was used. That's how a class works. So how are we going to accomplish this? Good question, my friend. That's where we get into these advanced techniques. And like I said, yes, we're talking about pseudo elements, but what I'm teaching you right now is going to come in so tremendously handy in many, many, many other use cases. So you really want to pay attention to this. You really want to understand the concepts. All right. So let's get cracking. We are going to use something called a locally scoped variable. The variable action, the variable secondary, these are globally scoped variables, which means I can use them anywhere on my website and I'm going to get the outcome that I wanted. A locally scoped variable is a variable that is defined on a single class or even an ID. And then it's only available within that class or the children that you're working with, okay? So these are children, right? So they'll be able to use the locally scoped variable. So I'm going to define the locally scoped variable at the parent level. All right, so we're going to come up to this root, which remember is the parent, and we're going to create our first locally scoped variable. Now, if you don't even know what a variable is, I have a whole video on it, and I'm going to do an actual video on globally scoped versus locally scoped variable. I'll do a dedicated video on this topic. But for now, all you need to know is a variable is just a token. It's a placeholder for a value within a specific context. Like action is a placeholder for a hex code or an HSL string or whatever. And so I don't need to memorize the hex code. I don't need to memorize the HSL string. I just need to know the name of my color, and then I can reference my color perfectly anywhere that I want to. That's how a variable works. Now, we're going to create a locally scoped variable. We're going to pick any of these items that need to be manipulated, potentially changed or altered in the future. And we are going to create a variable for it. So for example, I am going to do one for the blur. That's probably going to be the easiest one to see exactly what we're trying to accomplish here. So the blur. Now, keep in mind, there's a before and there's an after. So when we name these variables, we need to name them in such a way that they make perfect sense, even if we leave this project alone for 3 months. I talk about the 3-month rule all the time. Can you leave it alone for 3 months, come back to it, look at the code, look at what you've done and understand what's going on without a bunch of analysis, without a bunch of trial and error, without a bunch of headaches, all right? You don't want to trigger migraines when you're working on an existing project. So here we go. We're going to come up here and say before, and then what are we doing? Blur, right? So the before blur is this value right here, 50 pixels, okay? And then, so this is the way we create a variable. It's a double dash, then the name of the variable, whatever you want to call it, and then the value of that item. Like, what does this token represent? This token represents 50 pixels, but in a specific context of its name, the before blur. So the before pseudo elements blur. All right, so what we're going to do to use this variable is we're going to come down here and we're going to replace this with a variable function, a var function. And this is how we call that token. So we write before blur, just like that. So we take exactly what we wrote and we just wrap it in a var function, just like that. And now you can imagine that this whole string right here that I've highlighted, in your mind, all this does is say 50 pixels. That's all it does. So it's a word, but it represents this value right here of 50 pixels. Now what we can do is we can create an after blur, okay? And the after blur is going to be 50 pixels. And we're going to come down here and we're gonna put in var blur, after blur. Okay, also represents 50 pixels. Now, what we're gonna do is save, we're gonna go to the front end, and the first thing we wanna verify is, are they still blurred? Because if this variable was not working, they would not be blurred anymore, right? Because that blur string would be invalid. But they are working. So everything that we've done is good up to this point. What does this give us the ability to do? Watch this. I can quickly say my before blur is 10 pixels, my after blur is 20 pixels. I'll save, I'll go to the front end, and there you go. So this one is, what did I say the values were? 10 and 20. So this one is 10 and this one is 20. I can easily say this one is 1 and this one is 10. And then we'll hit save and then we'll refresh. There you go. So you can see that I'm able to manipulate now that part of my pseudo elements using these locally scoped variables. Now, what we have to do is we have to continue using variables for anything that we would want to potentially change. The next one we're gonna do is this display, which you're like, Kevin, why would you do a variable for the display? You want it to display. You want it to display flex. Well, actually, when we use this class, there is a use case where I put on this blur class, 2 elements show up, but I only want one of them. I wanna hide one and show one. So what we need is a variable for the display so that I can set one of them to display none if I want to. All right, so what we're gonna do is say before display, and then I'm gonna say flex. And I'm gonna say after, let me just copy this whole line right here and paste it down here and change this to after. And then what I am gonna do here is I'm gonna come in and just try to organize this a little bit. So I'm gonna use a CSS comment, which allows me to write text that I want to give me a little note, which is not gonna get output it's not gonna affect the CSS output, basically. All right, so we're gonna say that this is the after element, and then I'm gonna grab this and say that this is our before element. And now you see I've got them kind of organized a little bit. All right, so I've got before blur, before display, after blur, after display, and this is gonna be set to flex. And I'm gonna take my variable and I'm gonna come in and I'm gonna insert them. So this is a variable function here for my before display. I can just copy this line. I'm gonna come down here, paste it in. This is my after display. I'm gonna go ahead and save. Did our objects disappear? No, they did not disappear. So we're good to go. All right, the next thing I'm gonna do is make the width and height so that I can actually change the dimensions of this object, okay? So I'm gonna do a before width, and we're gonna say 40 rem was our value. I'm gonna do a before height of 40 rem. The other thing I can do, if I always want it to be square, or if I just want to play with aspect ratios, instead of doing a width and height, I could just say, what is the aspect ratio of this object and what is its width? And then it'll have that width and it'll have that aspect ratio. That's up to you. Something that you can do. It's whatever, right? Whatever comes to your brain that you're like, I want to do that. You can do it, right? You now know the techniques. So now I'm going to copy these 2 things and we're going to do after, okay, perfect. Now what we are going to do is put those variables in. So, and then if you're using automatic CSS, you have variable expansion, right? So you can do before width, and then when you put the semicolon, it's gonna write the var function for you. And now I can come in and say before height, and it's gonna write the var function for me. And then I can just copy these and we'll bring it down here. Bam, bam. So we're gonna do after, and then this is gonna be width. All right, so we've got those variables put in. The position being absolute can just stay like this. We need coordinates, guys. All right, so we're gonna do a before. Now, here's the thing with coordinates. Right now, I've written this with top and left, and this one with bottom and right, which does give me the positioning I wanted on this particular image. However, this is not gonna work open-ended, right? It's not gonna give me every possible point of control that I need for both of these elements. So there's 2 things you can do. One is better than the other. One is objectively better than the other. And a lot of people don't know this, so it's another little golden nugget that you're gonna want to jot down, okay? You could come in here and say it's top right of auto, and then put a bottom in, a bottom of auto. That's how we go. We start at the top of a box and we go around, right? So top, right, bottom, left. So you have top, right, bottom, left. Top is 0, right is auto, bottom is auto, left is 0. But that is a lot of writing. 4 variables now. I need a variable for top, a variable for right, a variable for bottom, a variable for left. That is not super efficient, not super efficient. So what I'm going to do is delete all of this and replace it with 1 line and 1 variable. And that's going to be called inset. So this is a shorthand property for top, right, bottom, and left on this positioning. So our top is going to be 0. Our right's going to be auto. Our bottom is going to be auto. Our left is going to be 0. There is our line right there. And so now what we need to do is come up here before inset and then write that string right there. And then I'm going to copy it, come down here and do our after inset. So our top is going to be auto. Our right is going to be 0. Our bottom is going to be 0. Our left is going to be auto. And now what we have to do is test this out by putting in our variable. So I'm going to say before inset, and then I'm going to come down here and I'm going to say after, we got to get rid of these, write the word inset, after inset variable, and there we go. So now I'm going to hit save. We're going to come up here and we still have both of our boxes, both still in the correct position. Now we do need to test this out. So what happens if I say before inset top of, actually the left will probably be top, right, bottom, left. So let's do a top of 5M and a left of 5M. And let's see where it puts this box. So I save, refresh, look at that. It moved the box over there and down a bit. So our inset control is absolutely working. I'm gonna set this back to 0 and I'm gonna set this back to 0. Do you guys see how, when I said a little bit ago, did I know all of these things that were gonna be needed before I built this thing? No, we're figuring it out. You gotta go step by step, piece by piece, okay? Progressively work to where you want to end up. All right, so we've got our before inset, we've got our after inset. We're gonna come down here. What else is left? My gosh, our background color, okay? So we're gonna say before BG, and this is gonna be var action, okay? Now, this is a little trippy, a little inception-y. You're like, whoa, you created a variable that references another variable. Yes, absolutely. You're gonna see this all the time. So I'm giving this variable additional context for where it is used, right? So this is for the before background color, and it's using var action as a value. It could use anything as a value, okay? Well, I'll show you. Let's go down here. Background color, we're gonna replace with the variable before BG. Now watch this, I come up here, I can change this from action to red and it changes to red. I can change this to secondary using another variable, and it's gonna change it to the secondary color. I can say it's gonna be purple. All right, and now it's a purple box. So it gives me the ability to quickly change the color on the fly. I want it to be var action, and then what I wanna do is grab that, bring it down, and say that this is the after BG, which is secondary. Come down here, here's before BG, and then background color is gonna be after BG. We still have not gotten to the magic yet, guys. All right, stick with me. I know we're just checking boxes, right? But we're about to get to the magic of locally scoped variables. Okay, so opacity, of course, opacity, very important. Before opacity, and I'm gonna say that this is 0.12, okay? That is the value for before opacity. I'm gonna bring after opacity down, and that's gonna also be 0.12. It could be anything, could be different. And now what I'm gonna do is replace the value with the token. So this is gonna be before opacity. If I could type correct, wow, if I could type correctly. And then I'm gonna come down here. Actually, I need that whole line. Oh, yeah, no, I didn't, but whatever. After opacity, hit save. Now we're good. What about our Z index? This is just a decision, a business decision. Do you need to be able to change the Z index? I personally don't right now. If we ever need to in the future, we can add the ability to. The rotate, oh, big one, got to do that, okay? So I'm gonna say before rotate, and this is gonna be -5 degrees as our value. And then I'm gonna copy that, bring this down. The after rotate is gonna be a +5 degrees. And then I can replace this with my token. So this is gonna be before rotate, and then after rotate down here. Where's my rotate? Rotate, rotate, rotate. Oh, there it is. Wow. All right, after rotate, save. So I have variables for everything. It looks like everything that was important. I'm good to go. Okay, so let's hit save. Can we still see our boxes? Yes, we can. Okay, now let's actually set our blurs back to the way that they were supposed to be. So before blur needs to be 50 pixels, after blur needs to be 50 pixels. And now, guys, we are ready to talk about the magic. Now, you might be like, wow, this is a lot of work. But remember what I said is I need to use these blurs elsewhere. I'm not just doing this for this one image. I'm doing this so that I can use these blurs anywhere that I want. And they can be any size, they can be any blur, they can be any opacity, they can be any color, they can be anything. Any of these things that I made tokens for, they can be different on an individual basis, but they can be created from this one class. Really, really, really important technique, okay? All right, so we're gonna save our work and we're gonna take a look at what we've got. And that is almost a direct replica of what was going on here. I think our box down here is rotated a little bit differently, but you get the point, right? We basically recreated what you see there. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm going to create some additional sections. And you can do this on a section, you can do this on another element, it doesn't really matter. I'm gonna do it on the bottom section down here. And what I'm gonna do is pop in that class of blur. And I'm gonna hit save, and we're gonna go refresh the page. There it is. So you can see the red box right here. And what I'm gonna do so that you can see, well, this will make it easy. This will make it easy. And you can see our inset is something's a little backwards, a little different here. All right, we got to figure out what's going on exactly. So I'm gonna come down and take a look at this section. So here's the class of blur, and I can see all of these things here. Now what I'm gonna do, you don't have to use all of them again. You really only use the ones you want to change, all right? But I'm just gonna copy them all. I'm gonna copy this whole root function right here. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna click off of the class. And now, because this is a one-off instance of how I'm wanting to change these things, I'm going to change them at the ID level. And here's the magic of locally scoped variables. I can take this out right here, and I'm just now looking at my variables. Any changes that I make here will only occur to this one-off instance of these blurs. It will not affect my other blurs up here. Okay, and this is why I said you should write all this CSS in one place, because anytime you add this class, even 3 months from now, like you're not gonna remember all these variables, what they are 3 months from now. But the minute you add a class to an element, like a new element like this section down here, the class of blur, all you have to do is look, they're right there. It's just telling you, here are all the variables that are available to you. You copy them, you take off the class, you paste them at the ID level, and now you can change them. And you can manipulate and create new accent blurs or accent blobs or whatever they are for this one specific context without interrupting any other context that was ever created before this time, okay? So let's prove this. So our blurs are gonna go to 0, okay? So we're gonna say blur 0, 0. Our after, we don't even wanna see it. So we're gonna change the display to none, and that's gonna go away. Then really, none of these other variables matter here. Once we do the after of none, we can just take away everything else. So now I come in and I'm just messing with my before. So I actually want to change the rotation to -15 degrees. And then our before opacity, I want it to be 22%. And then I want the inset to be from the top. Let's do 2M and then 2M from the left as well. So I'm changing that. I want it to be a little smaller. In fact, I want it to be a percentage of this container. So we're gonna do %30 and 30, that's fine. Actually, let's do VW and VH here. Perfect. And then I want to, let's blur it again, but just a little bit. Okay, so 20 pick. Let's change its color. I'm just trying to show you that we can do anything that we want here. Okay, there's red. And I'm noticing the only thing that's not working is the rotation. So before rotate, a minus 15 degrees. So I'm just gonna come in and inspect what we've done with the class here. So transform, there's what's going on. I got rid of my rotate function. So my variable needs to be inside of that rotate function. Did I do that down here? Transform, I did that down here as well. So rotate, open, and then put my variable in. So you're gonna run into little problems. You gotta be able to kind of diagnose real quick and see what's going wrong. And now let's refresh. Look at this. I added a class, okay? And you can see the blurs here are added with that same class, but this looks completely different and the after is gone. I have independent control. I can put these blurs anywhere that I want, manipulate them any way that I want using these locally scoped variables at the ID level. Why does this work? Because ID styling always overrides class styling. And this is just how variables work in general. Basically, you're redefining the token at on an element, the ID, that has greater priority over where they were defined at the class level. They still have access to each other. And even though these are child elements, they still have access to the parents' variables. And because these are locally scoped, you don't even have to worry about the names. You don't have to give them super unique names because it's like, what if I use these again on a different class? Doesn't matter because they only apply to the class that's active, okay? They're not gonna manipulate. They can't reach into other classes and change the values of those classes because they're scoped at those other classes, right? So it just works perfectly. It gives you tremendous control versus having to recreate new classes, copy all this existing code, right? Repeating yourself over and over and over again, and then manipulating these on a class by class by class by class basis. I don't think that's a good solution at all. I want one class to add these elements, and then I want to use locally scoped variables to manipulate their display, their behavior, their style, all of that, okay? So this is the technique that I use, Geary.co. Again, I haven't seen anybody else doing this. It doesn't mean that nobody else is doing this. I just ran into the problem of, I want to use these blurs everywhere, but I want to change how they behave. I want to change their position. And by the way, let me say this again. I mentioned it briefly in the beginning. If you want to use GSAP to animate objects like this, you can absolutely animate objects like this with GSAP. You're going to need to use locally scoped variables to change the variable value with GSAP. So this is not a situation where you can animate these just with classes, okay? For the most part, the variables are going to make GSAP life way better, way easier, if not like being the only effective way to do it. So this is, like I said, critical technique. Okay, we're gonna close this up. Let me go back to camera here. Hopefully you guys got a ton out of this. Hit the like button if you did. If you got a tremendous value out of this, hit the like button, drop a comment below. This is something that needs to be in your toolbox. Yes, we applied the concept of locally scoped variables and ID overrides and things like that to this one task. But this is something that will come in handy over and over and over again. Once you understand it, once you know it, when we're building frames, for example, in our product called Frames at getframes.io, we're using locally scoped variables all the time. In fact, you should think about using variables anytime you find yourself repeating yourself in CSS, which happens a lot. You should be using probably locally scoped variables instead, or of course, global variables help as well. Anyway, hope you guys love this. Again, drop a comment, let me know you liked it. And don't forget, every single Wednesday, 11 a.m. Eastern, right here on this channel is my Web Design for Dummies live series. We do live in-depth website critiques covering everything from UX, UI to SEO to dev best practices to copywriting and conversion. Everything that is important on a website, we provide unprecedented value. There's nobody else providing this level of value that we give on Web Design for Dummies free every single Wednesday at 11 a.m. So make sure you join and watch that series. I hope you guys have a fantastic week. I love you. Thank you for the support. I'll be back very soon. Peace.